Hello again. As I work through our case, which I think provides a good sort of case study for all those that are concerned about corruption in family courts and social services, and certainly provides us with a platform for when we make more detailed disclosures and so on, creates a nice sort of digital story. And I've been able to sort of wrap that into the coordinated coercion that I've received right the way through from the FCA to South Tyneside Council, also including um, Judge Rachel Hudson, as we sort of expose this appalling trade of children with private equity owned agencies. Now, the common theme has been the use of narrative to create realities for people, and I think we've seen that take a whole new arena with the appalling conduct of the United States in the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Now, I don't claim Maduro was a good president. He followed on was the successor for Chavez, who had some success in leveling up inequality, and the the hostility of the United States to Maduro really links back to the Chavez time when he nationalized oil assets and tried to create benefits from that to level down extreme inequality, and that he had some mixed success. But as a successor, I would say Maduro wasn't particularly good. That said, it's an illegal action to storm the capital of a sovereign state and abduct their president. And you could see before that how the United States were trying to create this pretext of Maduro operating some sort of drug scam, and the US were carrying out for some time extrajudicial killings, blowing up very small boats off the coast of Venezuela and trying to say that they were in, seeking to transport drugs into the United States, where if you looked at the size of some of the boats, it just looked very odd. They didn't look big enough. And they were creating this pretext, which we know is to justify brazen resource grab. And we're seeing with our sort of Prime Minister, Mr. International Law, you've seen how sort of vacuous and how much of a fraud he is, because scared stiff of Donald Trump, he's too afraid to come out and criticize it. And I've given you examples on this channel and the other channel of how essentially he was slavishly following international law on the Chagos Islands transaction. But then the British government were sort of encouraging the theft of Russian assets that had been frozen following the war in Ukraine. Whereas, of course, you can make an argument for the Russians making a contribution to the rebuilding of Ukraine whenever we reach a conclusion of that. The conclusion is obviously going to be a lot harder now after the United States sort of hypocritical actions in Venezuela. But you can make an argument for Russian assets being used to help rebuild Ukraine, but you can't just brazenly steal them. So Starmer's following of international law has been fraudulent and vacuous for some time, and the Venezuelan example is another good one. Shows how he's completely and utterly without any soul or character. Now, in terms of my own case, we've of course seen that with the pretext of me allegedly vandalising Rachel Hudson's car in January and February of last year. And then being asked in an interview the how I reacted to badly to an email received 2 months after the last act of vandalism. You can see how the pretext was used to try to to justify seizing, in my mind, stealing, because they took them without my permission. Whatever law that they are adhering to, they used this false pretext to take my devices because they wanted to search. They're very, very concerned about research that has been garnered on the FCA, Rachel Hudson, South Tyneside Council and the broader um, family court and social services system and this trade of children with private equity owned agencies. There is the whole thing is a disaster for them, because we're going to need their body cam footage, when they're taking me from the property without shoes, using unnecessary aggression. They're, they were trying to mislead my wife, saying, my wife was saying, what are you looking for? You've got the devices. She said, are you looking for spray paint? You've got one officer saying no, another officer eventually saying yes, we are. So what they're trying to say is 9 and 10 months after it, a person who allegedly damaged this car on two occasions. To me, it looked like two different incidents conducted by different people, by the evidence that they showed me, which clearly they didn't let me take away. And you've got this notion that somebody would bring back the very same paint, which looked different colours. It was black, it wasn't a good quality picture, but they would look like white on one and yellow on another. They bring the very same paint back to their property and let it linger around all that time. So it's just a shambolic pretext to seize devices, because they're concerned about research that's going to be published that isn't actually even on those devices, but they're using it to apply mental, psychological abuse, because they're aware that we've got some very significant material. Another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is, we've done quite a lot of research into this. We've done a lot of search into Adam Lloyd and his record. They won't release his service record. They won't release the order. They won't release, because we know there's going to be, we believe there's some issues over there. We can't find any indication that these alleged acts of vandalism were ever seriously investigated by the police at the time. Because clearly what we're going to want to do is conduct our own research. Did the police visit? Did they source CCTV? Did they get witness statements? Did they visit the people in the near vicinity and try to ascertain if they got door cam or CCTV footage and so on and so forth? We will have to do that ourselves. If they take this further, we will insist we have to know where these incidents happened and conduct our own research as a defence. So I don't actually want to know where this woman lives, but we're going to have to because there's clearly a lot of work to be done. Another aspect is, if you look at some of the questioning they gave away, what the true motivation was, you can see by the question I just suggested, that where he just blew all credibility by saying I reacted poorly to an email my wife had received from the family court 2 months after. So that's the time machine theory, which is very similar to what I showed you with Hughes with the Dawn Sturgis inquiry. They had no evidence that these alleged Russian assassins, who were really, from the basic research I could do, looked like spies, observers, information gatherers, passers, and so on and so forth. I would suggest they were there to observe Skirple rather than actually to harm him. So they Hughes, if you read his report, there's no evidence that they walked into a densely populated cul-de-sac right the way to the end of it, noon on a Sunday afternoon, without being seen, without protected equipment, a house that's occupied, walk up to the door handle, spray with a fake perfume bottle, a lethal nerve agent onto a door handle, and then make their way out, all without being seen. So if you look at Hughes, he said, well, they must have done. That's when they must have done it. So he kind of fitted his own narrative to create this reality that it was the Russians that were responsible for this Novichok attack. And again, I say this with full respect to Dawn Sturgis, is not to besmirch her at all. It's just, it's another example. Northumbrian Police and Rachel Hudson, in coordination with other institutions, have created this similar pretext as well. Other questions, one question that the officer put to me, who was, at one point he was grinning like a vacuous Cheshire cat, and I said to him, are you laughing? Because I was using 2-3 syllable words, and he couldn't. He was struggling to comprehend them. But he asked me, is this video, which is posted on the other channel, where I said a judge is on notice, and actually we've researched quite a few judges, but Rachel Hudson's one that we put a lot of attention to her lineage in the industry. Would this constitute harassment? Didn't even name her, so you can see how that video was all about coordinated coercion. So he was bringing forward what we knew all the time, that this was a coordinated coercive move. And another one, there was another bizarre one where we'd laid a trap for them, essentially, where he said, you sent an email to, I think it was 8 people. Would this constitute harassment? Now, what that related to was an email in October. Now, I was very upset. My wife had been abused on a care team meeting by South Tyneside Council. She tried to raise legitimate concerns about our daughter's heritage, which has been destroyed by South Tyneside Council. And during the case proceedings, there was multiple warnings given to Rachel Hudson about this, that she decided to wave through. And I came home from work and she was tearful again. She'd been abused. There's multiple examples we got of her being abused on these meetings, just standing up for her daughter's welfare and her heritage. And I'd had enough. And I said, I've had enough of this coordinated coercion that we're facing. It's not acceptable. Standing up to the basic rights of our daughter, to enjoy her Polish heritage that's been destroyed. Looking after her welfare. We looked after her to an incredibly high standard, and many people said that. Of course, they weren't allowed to contribute to the case. It just didn't fit the narrative. But it didn't fit the narrative of the trade. And I sent this off, and it was a bit of a trap because we knew eventually they would bite, because and the fact that he asked that question just completely showed that. Because why, if you were there on the pretext of harassing one person, Rachel Hudson, would you allude to an email to other people which identified that line of coordinated coercion? So effectively, he revealed for us what we knew was there anyway, and that I'd been complaining about for some time. And as I said, I called out the FCA for this. I called out South Tyneside Council for it. Deirdre Ryan, I confronted her in a public meeting about, we'd receive coordinated coercion from them if we continue with these intricate investigations regarding WealthTek and the trade of children into private equity hands as part of the promotion of private assets. All this linked to the secondary objective, the growth objective of financial services. They would cut my access to my daughter. So they couldn't move on the FCA. They couldn't move on South Tyneside Council. So they went Judge Hudson. We knew, so we were setting it up for them to step forward. Because we knew they were getting worried about the material we got. That has to come out by different distribution channels. It can't come out initially on YouTube. We knew that they would do something, and that's effectively he did that for us. This is a court, so this is all one case. WealthTek, private assets, it's all one case. And he showed that for us. Northumbria Police showed that for us, and Northumbria Police themselves are embodied in this because they have horrendous conflicts of interest themselves. So this is all one case. WealthTek, private assets, including what's happened to my own daughter, is all one case. And that's why I issued that statement to Suffolk Court. They will try to fight that it isn't, but it is. It's fundamentally, why this has happened, why I've faced these threats, why I've faced police state terror, is confronting a regulator that it's conflicted, as a regulator prosecutor, and it's putting its own reputation above the welfare of those people who fund it, in this case the victims of the WealthTek scandal. And I've also showed how they've done similar behavior with Woodford as well. Also, I identified how the FCA with HM Treasury, suppressing any calls for accountability over WealthTek, a 9-year alleged fraud leading to an 80 odd million pound shortfall, um, covering a whole range of catastrophic errors from the FCA, errors that would make a frontier market blush, have been suppressed because it doesn't fit the narrative of promoting the financial services industry to generate growth and encouraging people to take more risk in the stock market, etc. Because if they knew the scale of the catastrophic failures of WealthTek and actually Woodford as well, and the fact that they had full visibility on that right the way to the end, and saw it lead to a worst case scenario for the Woodford investors. If people knew all this, they would push back and say, well, hang on, we need to know the system's safer before we actually dive in and take more risk, if you want us to run down our cash assets. And then, of course, the promotion of private assets, which is effectively private equity. And as we drilled behind that and said, it's not all bad, but there are some very bad things happening in the background in this trade of children into private equity-owned institutions. It is a deplorable trade. The destruction of their emotional links with their families. In our case as well, destroying our daughter's Polish heritage to make her into a tradable cash generative asset, a human asset to be traded with private equity. Don't believe this nonsense that private equity generates superior returns and lower volatility. It is mostly nonsense. It's financial engineering with leverage, with subjective valuations that flatter the return profile. Go to your Asda store. The Telegraph, I think, are running a story on Asda today on how it's been asset stripped. It's a shadow of the business it used to be. Morrison's is the same, follows the same profile. Private equity is not a good business. Why are they interested in the care industry? Why are they interested in fostering agencies and adoption? We'll come to adoption. Actually, adoption we'll come on to at a later date, which is one of the reasons why it's rattled Rachel Hudson, and she knows very well why that is. Why are they interested? Is it a coincidence that there's long-term, this growth in long-term care orders is coincided with a growth in the activity of private equity in the sector? I explained it on the other channel. Lots of break-offs, small agencies set up, fostering agencies set up by former social workers and others that work in the industry to benefit from this. Private equity starts consolidating them all up, using the debt to buy them all up, lock into these very long-term cash profiles. Is it a coincidence that these long-term care orders are constructed in a way where they're not designed to be broken? Hence, side hindsight, we never support children going back to their parents. Deirdre Ryan and also Helen Singleton, we never support them, even though they could provide no examples of when children had insisted that they went back and they had to eventually follow the wishes of the child. That they could provide no evidence that those wishes were the wrong thing to have done. Because, very simple, am I wrong in assuming that unbroken long-term cash flows are valued at a much higher level than long-term cash flows that in theory can be broken at any time according to the wishes of the child? It's a complete nonsense. It's very important here to understand that we're not picking fights for the sake of it. We're not singling out people for no good reason. We are not disrespecting judges for the sake of it, not at all. The issue here is the family court system has been given, and social services, some very, very broad privileges with generally with good intentions to protect children and their welfare. These have been abused, not universally, actually. Some social services around the country are markedly better than others, but there are examples where they've been wholly abused, and that is what we're challenging, and that is what we're showing. And now you can't get a situation where judges are seen as gods, where they're completely unaccountable. As Rachel Hudson's will publish as we move through this journey, had a very much liked, very bullying style, very arrogant, very, belief that she was completely and utterly unaccountable. It's my court. It's my court. This is my court. No, it is not your court. It's given your court under trust, that you behave with integrity that is commensurate with your position and the trust that's been placed in you. Actually, it's the court of the people who fund you, the third estate, and they expect certain standards. So that is what we're challenging. And as we again, as I've said, this whole process is a manufacture of narrative to fit a trade. That is exactly a reverse engineered approach. And, everything can be, anything that doesn't fit the narrative is dismissed. And even if you look at contact notes, for instance, which are produced by the local authority, South Tyneside Council, and there's a woman in the Poppyfield Centre, Jill McQuire, that oversees a lot of it. And they produce contact notes based on meetings and so on and so forth. And effectively, they can be used selectively as evidence. So they can manufacture their own evidence. So I'll give you two examples. The one where my wife and young daughter were racially abused by a lady called Alison McAlpine in the Poppyfield Centre. This was very early on in the case, where there was a Polish interpreter present. She waltzed into the meeting and started shouting that Polish shouldn't be used in the meeting. And it terrorized my wife and my daughter. And my daughter was in tears, my wife was in tears, and my daughter was whispering, saying, I'm too scared to speak Polish. She was later corrected and allowed the use of Polish. But she'd done so much damage, so much intimidation, that she just brutalized any sort of relaxed notion that Polish could be used, but in communicating mainly between my wife and daughter. Nothing was done about that. There was no remedial action taken. It wasn't covered in contact meeting notes, and there was no apologies. She actually provided some sweets at a later meeting to younger daughter. It's quite a risible offering. But again, that wasn't presented to the court. They didn't want to talk about that, so we had to. But again, obviously, it was dismissed because there's friction on the trade. But then when there was a meeting, contact meeting, where there was a contact worker, family worker called Gillian Tate, who used to do. We'll cover Tate as we go through this, but one of the favourite things that they like to do is in the car. Daughter said she didn't want to meet at a future meeting and things like that. It was always in the car when no one else could verify it and things like that. And there was one around Easter where they said, she didn't want to meet at a meeting around Easter. And previously, the daughter said, can you do it wherever we go? Can you just do a little Easter egg hunt for us? And we said, yeah. I mean, she used to love them around the house. And they said, yeah, that's no problem. We'll try, with the best with these people who treat us so appallingly bad. We'll try to do the best we can. And they turned up and said, she wants a break. You could see on her face she had tears in her eyes that she'd been bullied into this, and effectively, I guess someone else wanted to do something themselves, and they wanted the meeting was inconvenient. So they said in the car, she doesn't want to tell. She's upset. She doesn't want to tell you because she'll upset you. All these awful tricks. You start to see in this process the awful things that people would do for money. I saw it at WealthTek, turning a blind eye to obvious things that were wrong, not standing up. Together and being able to go and talk to the regulator en masse rather than one person. All the things that people would do badly for money, presenting evidence they know is not true, destroying a Polish heritage, and so on and so forth. And you see it with Donald Trump. The United States has got enough assets, and it still wants more and more. And the greed and the immorality of people for money. I've really seen it over these last years, and it's quite appalling. It really is, and you see it in these cases. And you look at these. Actually, if you look at these, because the local authority feels it can do what it wants. It releases these notes with great delay, and you can see why when you receive them, because you can actually see the change in writing between the actual contact workers, who probably made some notes, who likely made some notes of each meeting, and how they've been venomized, almost made more venomous by a different style of writing. And you can see how it's been patched. And we've analysed lots of these with handwriting experts, and they've actually just identified this has been written by someone else, and it's always to make it worse. And it's incredible, and all this is considered evidence. So let's revert back to the case, because eventually, if you refer on the other meeting, there've been some notes that have been found, and it caused some friction between older daughter and foster carer, where it was like some sort of spider graph, effectively, where she was putting down notes, and it looked like she copied something from the internet, effectively. And essentially what had happened is that they tried to use these notes to create trouble and provide them to the police. The police have pushed back. This was about the time when they were ignoring me. I wanted a police investigation, and said that no, this manner in which they've been found by the foster carer turning over her bedroom would suggest some prejudice, because they weren't, they were private notes. Effectively, when we produced private notes, of course, saying our older daughter had made appalling comments about a younger daughter, saying that she would be on her own, that one day she'd be on her own, which is exactly what's happened. She abandoned her in a foster placement at the earliest opportunity, despite them building this faux narrative of her being this super protective sister. And part of the reason that she left the foster placement was an overbearing nature, by her words, she'd said to her of the foster care, which obviously was consistent with the Northumbria police observations as well. Um, our notes weren't allowed to be used, because they said the wrong thing. They didn't fit the narrative of the trade. And if you so eventually they came up with a new set of notes from older daughters. So they'd been pushing her to write something, and they actually sent them around the legal group. And the interesting thing of them was how choreographed they were. They normally, what you would expect someone to do is say, write about things that you had difficulties with or whatever, so on and so forth. And you would freestyle, and you would just write and write and write, because your brain would be saying, write this, write this, write this. This was done in a very calculating way. It was reading, bluing, very, very it's very almost stage managed, choreographed. It was extraordinary. There was some really, really odd things. I mean, not only were the allegations completely absurd, um, it's the way in which it'd been done, calm, calculated, not somebody who was unleashing all their thoughts. It was done in a very calm and calculated way. It actually showed it to some. We tried to sort of normalize it a bit, but shown it to subject it some psychological analysis, and it's threw up some very very worrying feedback. And I won't go into that huge at this stage in terms of the calculated nature of it and the presentation of it. They're very, very significant because what I did with those, and this is where I'll take these videos, is fundamentally this statement that was produced by older daughter, unsigned, who at a meeting of her own instigation said she'd never seen, was based around these notes. So it's no surprise that it was never signed. And I set a series of traps for the solicitor who was working with the child guardian allegedly for the children, a woman called Laura Peel. So what I'd done is as I was attacking these allegations, because they were absurd, and I'll come back to them in future videos. And what I was able to show is how she was manipulating. I called it, Darwinian evolution of the allegations and a retreat to vagueness. So effectively, I was challenging them because normally people would say, "Well, no, leave it to the final hearing." I'd already smelt a rat with that, and knew that the final hearing was a scam. Effectively, you wouldn't get a fair hearing at all. Hudson had already given that away. So I was attacking them with my statements and seeing how they would respond. And they were evolving these allegations in this very very oddly produced statement, the notes, to fit this narrative, and they were evolving. I was pointing that out as we went along. Of course, Hudson wasn't interested because it didn't fit the trade, so you wouldn't do it. But it's a fascinating journey I'll take you on, because you can see how this evidence is falsified. And of course, let's step back as well and also look at some of the things that Hudson has turned a blind eye to as friction to the trade. Firstly, the illegal way of which our younger daughter was kept at a school. We were legally obliged to collect. We were legally entitled to collect her when we turned up. So that was an illegal act by South Tyneside Council, working with the school, engineered by Kim Simpson. So she ignored that. The obscene act of racism, where she was banned from use of Polish. We weren't allowed to see her for 3 weeks. And the first meeting, letter from Laura Skelton, approved by South Tyneside Legal Services, blackmailing us that we could only see her after 3 weeks, never been out of our care before that time, unless we agreed that there would be no Polish spoken. An obscene act of racism. This was at a venue of their choosing, 3 weeks, more than enough time to arrange an interpreter. The incident of the first care meeting was described that the children have been brought up in Northeast culture without any consultation with the parents. We raised that as a serious concern. They've been brought up in the Northeast. Of course, Angela Nolan, the person who wrote that, was working as the independent reviewing officer, which is an absurd role, on the same payroll as the council, as the social services. The social worker who you end up working with, on very good terms with them. No credible person would regard these people as independent. And she made false statements, of course, as we'll review, in terms of saying that I picked up threw my older daughter against bookshelves and she somehow bounced around the room and broke her arm, when there was no other injuries on her body whatsoever, and nobody, 5 or 6 consultants who saw her over a protracted period, didn't raise any concerns at all. South Tyneside Council didn't want to call any of the people who treated her as witnesses because they knew there would be nothing there and it wouldn't fit the narrative of the trade. So, again, that's another very, very serious concern, which showed the intention was to cleanse the Polish heritage, was to destroy it. Cultural genocide, effectively all the things that senior British parliamentarians have accused the Chinese of doing with the ethnic Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And the BBC have made the same allegations as well. So all these things, harassment of Polish interpreters, Polish interpreters would come to us and still actually do. Wife's sort of generally given up now because they've destroyed her heritage. They've got what they wanted. They've completed their task of destroying a vital part of her life. Polish interpreters would say to us, "What are you doing here? Why are you here? What is being done to reunite you?" And we would say to them, "This is a trade. This is a business. This isn't life. This is a business. She's been traded. Nobody's doing anything to reunify us." And they would be almost nauseous and sick and say, look at us and say, "Are you being serious?" Yes, we are being serious. That is Britain. That's what happens. Children are traded with private equity owned agencies. That's the business. And they as decent human beings, they just couldn't understand it, and why would you? So the harassment, and of course when family workers, contact workers would see these conversations or see any sort of affinity between the interpreter and us as a family, they would meetings would be cancelled. They would write bad notes, and there'd be general hostility towards them. A couple of the women in particular were lovely people, and they were treated appallingly bad. And I actually apologised to them, saying I am deeply, deeply ashamed of how you've been treated. Racism, Britain still has a very, very serious issue with racism. You can see that. I mean, the most obvious channels are in football with black footballers and so on and so forth. I think in Newcastle United, footballers has recently been victim of that. But it's not just that. There's more subtle channels, as you've seen. Just this sort of Polish heritage. What does that mean? Just get rid of it. Let's do the deal, the trade. Other examples would be, the it's okay for President Trump to conduct reverse takeovers of resource-rich countries, but if Vladimir Putin does it, there's immense Russia-phobia. There's Russia-phobia in the news every day. The China-phobia in the news most days. Let's look at the treatment of atrocities. Bondi Beach and Manchester, the respective killings there, no doubt about it, were atrocities and must be condemned with the highest level. But if you went to Gaza and the West Bank, there would be people killed there every day. We're not even given the privilege of the names. It's a two-tier evaluation of lives. One atrocity has equality with another atrocity. It's got immense issues with racism in this country, and this is just a manifestation of it. I will then take you through the case, in particular, how these notes were manipulated into an unsigned statement. So let's finish and say, not only was the statement, there's a few weeks before the final hearing, Hudson should have said, "Where is this signed statement? Where is it?" It's also worth noting that it's about 6 weeks. It was about 6 weeks from the end of the final hearing to being called back. We did it by video link. I refused to attend in person because I knew what she was doing. Another 6 weeks until she confirms what her judgment is. She always was going to do what she was going to do. She made that very clear. More than adequate time to say, "Where is this signed statement?" She elected not to because it didn't matter. It's give me something, I need to sign it off. Another act of racism. There was she allowed representation of Polish consulate in case management hearings, but hugely bullied and dominated those to make sure that only really the South Tyneside Council representatives were allowed to speak. we were not allowed to raise any issues of the heritage destruction in any of those. So she kept that way out of the ears of the Polish consulate, then didn't allow them to attend the final hearing. But when you consider it, why would you do that? Because in those case management hearings, my wife got to say maybe 2 words to confirm who she was. So she didn't even really need them there. Where she really needed them was the final hearing, and they weren't allowed to be there. Why do you think that happened? It's no coincidence, is it? And so this case, it all leads to the financial services industry. It is WealthTek. WealthTek is this case. This case is WealthTek. This is full coordinated coercion. I've shown that, and anybody who suggests otherwise, I'm afraid, isn't being truthful. I'll be back as we continue this journey through this trading of children with private equity and the coordinated coercion that I've received. Take care. Bye.